You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. When the Korean War commenced with North Korea's invasion of South Korea on June 25, 1950, North Korea initially had the upper hand in terms of both manpower and equipment on the ground, compared to the South Korean and UN forces who rallied to prevent South Korea from falling. North Korea's strategy was to aggressively push back UN and South Korean forces, attacking directly and from the sides, to encircle and isolate them, causing confusion and forcing a retreat. This tactic worked well for North Korea in the early phases of the war, assisting them in their push southward until August. However, the scenario began to shift in August with the establishment of the Pusan perimeter by UN forces, forming a robust defense line that North Korea couldn't easily bypass. As North Korea continued to attempt breakthroughs with frontal assaults, including at the battles of Masan, Battle Mountain, the First Naktong Bulge, Taegu, and the Bowling Alley, their momentum began to dwindle. A significant pushback by the South Korean forces at the Battle of Pohangdong on the east coast further impeded North Korean advances. For the first time in the conflict, North Korea's strategies ceased delivering victories, indicating a turning point. By the end of August, North Korea's military was stretched thin, confronted with severe logistical issues and shortages of supplies, weapons, and new troops. Despite these challenges, North Korean forces preserved high morale and managed to initiate a massive offensive on September 1st, known as the Great Naktong Offensive. This all-out assault aimed at breaching the Pusan perimeter with simultaneous attacks across the entire defense line, caught the UN forces off guard, and put them on the brink of being overwhelmed. The North Korean military exerted significant efforts, attacking across various fronts, but ultimately could not maintain their advances. After intense combat, one of the toughest in the Korean War, the North Korean forces had to retreat, significantly weakened and vulnerable to counterattacks. This offensive marked a pivotal moment, showcasing the resilience of UN and South Korean forces in the face of adversity. Just days into the Korean War, General Douglas MacArthur, who led all United Nations forces, had a bold idea. He wanted to launch an amphibious attack to take back Seoul, which had swiftly fallen into enemy hands. MacArthur believed that the North Korean army would force the South Korean forces, who were struggling and lacked support for the US-backed government, significantly back. He saw an opportunity for a major turning point if he could maneuver troops behind enemy lines. MacArthur's initial choice for this daring operation was Inchon. Despite considering other locations, he initially planned this operation, named Operation Blue Hearts, for July 22nd, with the 1st Cavalry Division landing at Inchon. However, the urgency of the situation at the Pusan perimeter required the division's presence there, leading to the cancellation of Operation Blue Hearts. By July 23rd, MacArthur crafted a new strategy, dubbed Operation Chromite, intending for a September landing involving the United States Army's 2nd Infantry Division and the Marine Corps' 5th Marine Regiment. This plan, too, was shelved as these units were redirected to bolster the Pusan defense. Ultimately, MacArthur decided to employ the 7th Infantry Division, his last reserve in East Asia, for the Inchon landing, once it was brought up to combat strength. To oversee the invasion, MacArthur established the X Corps, designating his Chief of Staff, Major General Edward Almond, as its commander, in anticipation of a swift victory. Throughout August, re-equipping the undermanned 7th Infantry Division proved challenging, as it had previously sent 9,000 of its soldiers to the Pusan perimeter. Similarly, the Marine Corps had to quickly rebuild the 1st Marine Division, consolidating Marines even from as far as the Mediterranean to Korea. MacArthur also leveraged Korean conscripts through the Korean Augmentation to the United States Army program to reinforce the 7th Infantry Division, directing all incoming equipment to X Corps despite urgent needs elsewhere, particularly at the Pusan perimeter. The plan for Inchon, though daring, was met with skepticism due to the location's daunting natural and man-made defenses. The approaches were narrow, easily minnable passages, with treacherous currents and extremely high tides that could stymie further landings. The small anchorage and towering seawalls also posed significant challenges, leading U.S. Navy Commander Arleigh G. Capps to remark on the unfavorable conditions. Despite these concerns, and while many leaders preferred a landing at Kunsan for its proximity to vital enemy supply lines, MacArthur sought the element of surprise. He believed Incheon's very defenses might lead the North Koreans to overlook it as a possible invasion point, thus potentially catching them off guard for a decisive UN victory. On August 23, a significant meeting took place at General MacArthur's headquarters in Tokyo. High-ranking officials, including General Joseph Lawton Collins, who is the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Forrest Sherman, and the Deputy of Operations for the United States Air Force, Lieutenant General Idwal H. Edward, all came from Washington, D.C., to Japan for this briefing. Notably absent was the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, General Hoyt Vandenberg, perhaps due to his view that the operation was primarily a Navy and Marine Corps matter, and interestingly, the Marine Corps staff themselves were not included in this meeting, which later raised some eyebrows. During the briefing, Admiral James H. Doyle's team, made up of 9 members, delved deep into the technical and military details of the proposed Incheon landing for about an hour and a half. MacArthur pitched the idea of the Incheon landing over a landing at Kunsan. He argued that while Kunsan offered an easier merge with the 8th Army, it wouldn't achieve the strategic encirclement he desired, and could risk encircling his own troops instead. He swayed Admiral Sherman to his side, recounting his personal history with the Navy during World War II and the operation's strategic benefits. After everyone had spoken, MacArthur took about 45 minutes to lay out his reasoning behind choosing Incheon as the landing site. He believed its heavily defended status would make it an unexpected target for the North Koreans, potentially avoiding a harsh winter campaign and allowing United Nations forces to sever North Korean supply and communication lines. Sherman and Collins then returned to Washington, D.C., to brief Secretary of Defense Lewis A. Johnson, leading to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and President Truman approving MacArthur's plan on August 28. The Incheon landing is often talked about as a major amphibious operation, but it wasn't the first one post-World War II. That title goes to a United Nations operation on July 18, 1950, in Pohang, South Korea, which was uncontested and not in territory held by the Korean People's Army. Admiral Arthur Dewey Struble managed a diverse Joint Task Force 7 for the Incheon operation, featuring the Fast Carrier Task Force 77 for air support, Task Force 91 under Royal Navy Admiral William Andrews for blockade and coverage, Task Force 99 for patrols, Captain Bernard L. Austin's Service Squadron 3 for logistical support, Admiral James H. Doyle's Attack Task Force 90 as the invasion force, and the Military Sea Transportation Service to deliver the U.S. Army's 7th Infantry Division on September 18, 1950. Before the main battle on land took place, United Nations forces carried out several covert operations in Incheon. They dropped spies into the city and heavily bombarded its defenses from the air and sea. Additionally, they executed deception tactics to distract North Korean forces and direct their focus away from Incheon. The United Nations commanders were concerned about maintaining the element of surprise for the Incheon landings. With the obvious buildup of troops, supplies, and ships at Busan and in Japanese ports, and media in Japan openly discussing the landings as Operation Common Knowledge, there was a real worry that the plan had become too public. This concern grew when it was discovered that the leader of a North Korean-Japanese spy network, arrested in early September 1950 in Japan, had been found with a copy of the Operation Chromite plan. It was uncertain whether he had shared this information with North Korea before his capture. To monitor any response from North Korean, Soviet, or Chinese military forces, the United Nations deployed Navy patrol aircraft, ships, and submarines in the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea. On September 4, 1950, F-4U Corsair fighters from the USS Valley Forge engaged and shot down a Soviet Air Force A-20 Havoc bomber that attacked them over the Yellow Sea as it approached the United Nations Naval Task Force. To ensure the Incheon landings remained a surprise, the United Nations executed a complex ruse to make it seem like the real invasion would occur 105 miles south at Kunsan. Starting on September 5, 1950, United States Air Force aircraft began striking roads and bridges around Kunsan, mimicking the preparatory attacks expected before an actual invasion. This was followed by naval bombardments and, on September 11th, bombing by United States Air Force B-29 Superfortress bombers targeting the area's military facilities. Further efforts to mislead North Korean forces about the invasion target, included deliberately briefing United States Marines about a supposed landing at Kunsan within hearing range of local Koreans and landing special operations troops and commandos at Kunsan's docks in a high-profile manner. To add to the deception and refine their tactics for the actual invasion, United Nations forces performed various drills and small raids along the Korean coast in areas with conditions similar to Incheon. These activities were not only practice but also served to confuse North Korean intelligence about the true landing site. On the 17th of August 1950, a group from the South Korean Navy intelligence sneaked onto Yonghung Island and Deokjeok Island as part of a mission called Operation X-Ray. Their goal was to gather information about the situation on these islands, and they continued their intelligence activities until the 14th of September. In a related move, on the 1st of September, a team including members from the United States Military Intelligence, the Korean Liaison Office, and the Central Intelligence Agency also landed on Yonghung Island. This team, led by United States Navy Lieutenant Eugene F. Clark, was on a mission to collect intelligence as well, specifically by establishing a presence at the entrance of the harbor. They managed to send back valuable information to the United Nations Command by tapping into the knowledge of the local people. Clark and his team learned crucial details about the local geography, including tides, the composition of beaches, mudflats, and seawalls. Simultaneously, another operation named Trudy Jackson was set in motion by the United States military. This mission sent Yun Jong, a former lieutenant in the South Korean Navy, and K.E. Inju, a former colonel in the South Korean Army, to Incheon. Their objective was to gather more intelligence on the area. Clark made an important discovery during his 2-week observation of Incheon's tides. He found that American tidal charts were not accurate, but Japanese charts were much more reliable. He noted that Incheon experiences one of the largest tidal ranges in the world, with average tides rising to 29 feet, about 8.8 meters, and the maximum observed range reaching up to 36 feet, approximately 11 meters. This makes it the highest tidal range found in Asia. Clark's team also managed to deliver detailed reports highlighting North Korean artillery positions and defenses around Wolmi Island, Incheon, and nearby islands. They discovered and removed some North Korean naval mines during low tide. Importantly, Clark reported that the North Koreans hadn't extensively mined the channels, a crucial piece of intelligence for planning any future invasion. However, their presence did not go unnoticed. When North Korean forces found out that agents had landed near Incheon, they launched multiple attacks, including an attempted raid on Yonghung Island using 6 junks. Eugene F. Clark fought back by arming a sampan with a machine gun and sinking the attacking vessels. This provoked a tragic response from the North Koreans, who killed up to 50 civilians for assisting Clark and his team. On September 10, 1950, just a few days before the Incheon landing operation was set to begin, a squadron of 43 American fighter planes targeted Wolmi-do. Their mission was to clear a path for American ground forces by dropping a total of 93 canisters of napalm, aiming to devastate the island's eastern slope. The naval support for this complex amphibious assault was led by Vice Admiral Arthur D. Struble, a seasoned officer with a wealth of experience in landing operations from World War II, including the D-Day landings and the Battle of Leyte. Struble embarked on this critical mission aboard his flagship, the heavy cruiser USS Rochester, on September 12, 1950. His command included a formidable group consisting of the Rochester, the heavy cruiser USS Toledo, the British light cruisers HMS Jamaica and HMS Kenya, and a sextet of U.S. destroyers known as Task Element 90.62. This task element comprised USS Collett, USS De Haven, USS Girk, USS Henderson, USS Lyman K. Swenson, and USS Mansfield. Additionally, 3 Royal Canadian Navy destroyers, HMCS Cayuga, HMCS Athabascan, and HMCS Sioux, contributed to the invasion effort. In the early hours of September 13th, the U.S. Navy's Destroyer Squadron 9, led boldly by Mansfield, navigated the Flying Fish Channel to reach Incheon Harbor. Upon arrival, they launched an intense shelling operation on the North Korean People's Army positions in Wolmi-do and around Incheon. The combined firepower of the 2 British cruisers and the 6 American destroyers unleashed close to 1,000 shells, signaling to North Korean defenders that an amphibious landing might be near. Despite this, the North Korean officer in charge on Wolmi-do promised a fierce resistance. In response, North Korea's 918th Coastal Artillery Regiment managed to strike several ships, with Collett hit 7 times, Girk 3, and Lyman K. Swenson twice. This engagement resulted in casualties, including the death of Lieutenant Junior Grade David H. Swenson aboard Lyman K. Swenson, with 8 others wounded. Following this initial engagement, the American destroyers pulled back, allowing Rochester, Toledo, Jamaica, and Kenya to continue the bombardment for an additional 3 hours from south of the island. And during this time, Lieutenant Clark and his South Korean team, positioned on hills south of Inchon, carefully observed and reported the locations of active North Korean People's Army machine gun positions back to the invasion forces. Overnight into September 14th, Vice Admiral Struble made the decision to extend the bombardment for another day. Following his orders, the destroyers and cruisers amassed off Wolmi-do once again for sustained shelling. This was complemented by aerial bombings and strafing runs by aircraft from the Carrier Task Force throughout the day. In a pivotal moment on September 15, 1950, at 0:50, Lieutenant Clark and his South Korean squad took a significant step by activating the lighthouse on Palmito Island, marking a critical navigational point for the invasion. Following their lead, the amphibious force ships made their way through Flying Fish Channel towards Incheon, with U.S. Marines poised and ready to initiate the first landings on Wolmi-do. Shortly after the Korean War began, the Soviet Union swiftly acted in sending naval mines to North Korea, aimed at enhancing their coastal defenses. The Soviets did not merely send the mines. Experts were also dispatched to instruct the North Koreans on how to effectively deploy and utilize those mines. Among the locations to receive these mines was Incheon. However, it was not until early September 1950 that the United Nations forces, planning an invasion at Incheon, became aware that North Korean waters were mined. This discovery was alarming because it posed a significant threat to the Incheon invasion plans, and it was too late to alter the invasion date. However, the situation at Incheon turned out to be less severe than feared. The North Koreans had not deployed many mines, and those they had placed were relatively simple in design. During the invasion, the destroyers leading the operation identified and eliminated some visible mines at low tide through gunfire. Then, as the invasion force progressed through the channel at high tide, they were able to sail over any remaining mines without activating them, facilitating a successful landing on the assault beaches. Early in the morning on September 15, 1950, at 6:30 a.m., the first units of the X-Corps made their landing on Green Beach, located on the north side of Wolmi-do Island. This initial assault team was led by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Taplett and included the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, accompanied by 9 M26 Pershing tanks from the 1st Tank Battalion of the United States Marine Corps. One of these tanks was fitted with a flamethrower, and 2 were outfitted with bulldozer blades to aid in their operation. They arrived on tank landing ships, known as landing ship tanks. By noon, the entire island was under their control, and they achieved this with a relatively small number of casualties, totaling just 14. The defenders from the Korean People's Army were significantly outnumbered, with more than 6 United Nations troops for every one of them. The Korean People's Army suffered heavily, with over 200 killed and 136 captured, mainly from their 918th Artillery Regiment and the 226th Independent Marine Regiment. The forces on Green Beach had to hold their position until 7:50 p.m. because they needed the tide to rise to bring in additional troops. During the wait, they faced no significant counterattacks, partly due to heavy shelling, bombing, and the strategic placement of anti-tank mines on the only bridge leading to the island. The subsequent forces made their landings on Red Beach and Blue Beach. Notably, the North Korean forces were caught off guard by the invasion at Incheon. Following the United Nations' successful capture of Green Beach, the North Koreans were misled, possibly by American misdirection, into expecting the main assault to take place at Kunsan, diverting their focus and resources. As a consequence, only minimal forces were sent to Incheon, arriving too late to make a difference, as the United Nations forces had already secured Blue Beach and Red Beach. The effectiveness of the North Korean troops at Incheon had been further compromised by guerrilla actions led by Clark and devastating napalm bombing runs which destroyed essential ammunition supplies. In total, the operation involved 261 ships. For the secondary landings at Red Beach and Blue Beach, Vice Admiral James H. Doyle, leading an amphibious ready group, scheduled the landing to occur at 5:30 p.m. Meanwhile, the Korean People's Army's 22nd Infantry Regiment had moved into Incheon before daybreak on September 15th, but decided to retreat to Seoul following the main landing in the evening. The Red Beach forces, including a key unit, the Regimental Combat Team 5 along with the 3rd Battalion of the Republic of Korea Marine Corps, had to use ladders to climb over the seawalls in their mission. The task set before Lieutenant Colonel Raymond L. Murray, the leader of the 5th Marines, was daunting. He was to take control of a strip of land about 3,000 yards long and 1,000 yards wide. This area stretched from the northern tip at Cemetery Hill through a central point known as Observatory Hill down to the intertidal basin at the southern end. The plan was for the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, to engage the enemy at Cemetery Hill and the northern part of Observatory Hill, while the 2nd Battalion focused on taking the southern section of Observatory Hill and the inner basin area. On the afternoon of September 15th, as the landing ships made their approach to Red Beach, they were met with intense mortar and machine gun fire from enemy forces positioned on Cemetery Hill. Despite the fierce resistance, the troops managed to land and start offloading crucial equipment for the assault. They also managed to silence the enemy batteries targeting the right flank of Red Beach. Out of the 8 landing ships that participated, 3, the USS King County, the USS Lafayette County, and LST 973, suffered damages from the enemy's fire, resulting in the death of a sailor and injuries to several others. After completing their unloading tasks, the landing ships left the beach area at the turn of high tide in the early hours of September 16th. Following the successful neutralization of enemy defenses in Incheon on the night of September 15th, the forces from Red Beach were able to secure a causeway to Wolmi-do. This opened up the path for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and tanks from Green Beach to join the battle for Incheon, marking a significant advancement in the operation. The 1st Marine Regiment, led by Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller, made their landing at Blue Beach, which is located 2.5 miles southeast of where the Red and Green Beaches are situated. Their key objective, after securing the beachhead, was to take control of the Yeongdeungpo suburb, make their way across the Han River, and then establish the right flank for attacking Seoul. As they neared the coastline, intense fire from North Korean People's Army gun positions managed to sink one of their LSTs, which stands for Landing Ship Tank. However, the combination of destroyer bombardments and air raids quickly neutralized the North Korean People's Army defenses. By the time the forces arrived at Blue Beach, the North Korean People's Army had already given up in Incheon, facing little further resistance and incurring minimal casualties. The 1st Marine Regiment then focused on reinforcing their beach position and gearing up for the move inland. Once Incheon was liberated from North Korean People's Army forces, the process of bringing in supplies and reinforcements commenced swiftly. Seabees, the construction battalions of the United States Navy, and underwater demolition teams who had arrived alongside the Marines built a pontoon dock on Green Beach and cleared the waters of debris. This dock became crucial for offloading the rest of the landing ship tanks. On the morning of September 16th, Lieutenant Colonel Murray alongside Colonel Puller received their operational directives from General Oliver P. Smith, the commander of the 1st Marine Division. The 5th Marines, who had landed at Red and Green Beaches, pushed eastward along the road to Seoul, aiming to meet up with the 1st Marine Regiment in preparation for the joint assault on Seoul. During their advance, the 5th Marines encountered 6 T-34 tanks heading westward. They were efficiently engaged by a group of Marine F-4U Corsairs from Marine Fighter Squadron 214, resulting in 2 tanks destroyed and the rest retreating. Mi-26 Pershing tanks from the 1st Tank Battalion later took out 3 more North Korean People's Army tanks. Meanwhile, the 1st Marines were regrouping and didn't start eastward until about 4 p.m. overnight into September 17th. The 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines took up a defensive position commanding the main road to Seoul, near Askim City. Following them, the 1st Battalion secured a strategically important hill. Early on the 17th, from their forward lookout, members of an advanced D Company platoon spotted the silhouettes of 6 tanks, accompanied by infantry, some of whom were mounted on the tanks. These North Korean People's Army forces unknowingly passed the hidden Marines' outpost. At a close range of 75 yards, the Marines attacked with bazooka rockets, setting 1 tank ablaze. The Mi-26 Pershing tanks and recoilless rifles joined the fray, and within 5 minutes all 6 enemy tanks were destroyed, along with 200 North Korean People's Army soldiers from an estimated 250, with the 2nd Battalion sustaining only 1 wounded. Just before the sun came up at 5:50 in the morning on September 17th, something alarming happened. People spotted 2 Soviet-made aircraft, likely Yakovlev Yak-9s, flying over Jamaica. Initially, there was some uncertainty about where these planes were from and what they planned to do. However, any confusion quickly evaporated when a bomb exploded near the port side of the ship named Rochester. In total, 4 bombs were dropped. One of them hit Rochester's crane, causing a dent, but thankfully it didn't explode. Remarkably, no Americans were hurt in this attack. As the airplane started to move away, Jamaica retaliated by firing her port 4-inch guns at the leading plane. Reacting to this, the second plane shifted its course and began strafing Jamaica, firing multiple times. The attacks resulted in several impacts. 1 bullet pierced the armor of the gunhouse, injuring a man's leg. Another scratched the ship's side armor. A 3rd bullet exploded near the loaders of a quadruple pom-pom gun, wounding 3 men, one of whom later succumbed to his injuries after being moved to the hospital ship USS Consolation, and a final bullet hit the foremast, causing minor splinters to scatter. In response, every close-range weapon Jamaica had was used to fire back at this aggressive aircraft. Their return fire was so effective that the airplane disintegrated as it flew over the ship, ultimately crashing into the sea near Jamaica's starboard side. Kimpo Airfield was the top airport in Korea, and General MacArthur insisted on capturing it quickly. Once in control, it would make it easier for the U.S. Air Force and Marine Corps to fly fighters and bombers from Japan to attack North Korea. The 5th Marines made quick progress on September 17th, reaching the outskirts of Kimpo Airfield by 6 p.m. In just 2 hours, they took over the southern part of the airfield. The defending North Korean soldiers, numbering between 400 and 500, were caught off guard. They hadn't even booby-trapped the runway with mines. That night, the Marines fought off a few small counterattacks by the enemy from 2 a.m. until the morning of September 18th. With the help of E Company and tanks, they defeated these North Korean attempts, pushing the soldiers back to the northwest. By the morning of September 18th, Kimpo was fully in their hands and surprisingly well preserved, as the North Koreans hadn't had a chance to destroy it. They even left some of their planes behind. Now Kimpo would be the hub for the United Nations air operations on land. On September 19th, U.S. engineers fixed up the local railway to stretch 8 miles inland. Following the securement of Kimpo, transport planes started to bring in fuel and ammunition for the planes based there. The Marines also worked on bringing in more supplies and reinforcements. By September 22nd, they had managed to bring in 6,629 vehicles, 53,882 troops, and 25,512 tons of supplies, setting a solid foundation for further operations. On September 18th, the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines moved out towards the Han River, passing the airfield. At the same time, the 1st Battalion successfully took control of Hill 99 to the northeast and advanced to the river. Continuing their mission, the 1st Battalion on September 19th strategically captured key hills a mile west of Yeongdeung-po, specifically hills 118, 80, and 85, while the 2nd Battalion secured the high ground along their section of the Han River. By the evening of September 19th, the 5th Marines had control of the south bank of the Han River and were gearing up to cross over the next day. In the meantime, the 2nd Engineer Special Brigade took over the security duties in Inchon from the Republic of Korea Marines, who then moved closer to the Han River near Kimpo on the 18th and 19th. The Republic of Korea Marines also supported the left flank of the 5th Marines, and their 2nd Battalion was set to join the upcoming river crossing. During this period, the 1st Marines launched an attack east toward Yeongdeung-po along the Seoul Highway, destroying 4 Korean People's Army tanks early on the 17th. However, they encountered resistance from a Korean People's Army regiment, which halted their advance near a village called Sosa. Despite finding a significant cache of ammunition in Ascom City, their progress was checked, and they had to dig in for the night. The attack resumed on the morning of the 18th, with the 1st Marines moving through Sosa by mid-morning. Despite suffering casualties from Korean People's Army artillery fire, by noon they had secured Hill 123. The advance was further slowed down on September 19th, due to mines that damaged 2 tanks, requiring engineers to clear the way. By evening, the unit had managed to reach Kalchon Creek, just shy of Yeongdeung-po. Furthermore, the 7th Infantry Division's 2nd Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, landed at Inchon on September 18th, with more troops following. By the next day, they moved to relieve a Marine battalion, taking over positions to the south of Seoul. The division's responsibility then expanded to include the area south of the Seoul Highway by the evening of September 19th. Following their arrival, the 7th Infantry Division faced tough battles on the outskirts of Seoul against Korean People's Army forces. While the victory at Inchon was swift, the battle to take Seoul proved to be slow and grueling. Initially, North Korea had a weakened division in Seoul, with the bulk of its forces located to the south of the city. On the 21st of September, ex-Corps leader Commander Allman took charge of the operation, aiming to capture Seoul by the 25th of September, marking exactly 3 months since North Korea's invasion across the 38th parallel. The Marines entered Seoul on the 20th of September, facing intense combat, including house-to-house battles which led to increasing casualties. Commander Allman announced on the evening of the 25th of September that Seoul was free, a statement General MacArthur echoed the next day. However, at the time of Allman's announcement, intensive fighting was still ongoing in Seoul, with U.S. Marines battling North Korean forces that held most of the city. It wasn't until the 28th of September that the last North Korean troops were either expelled from the city or defeated. As the 5th Marines landed at Inchon, the final groups of North Korean troops still battling in South Korea were defeated. This happened as Walton H. Walker's 8th Army made a significant move out of the Pusan perimeter on September 16th, joining forces with the Army's 10th Corps for a combined attack against the North Korean forces. By September 22nd, these forces were retreating, and on September 23rd, the 8th Army alongside South Korean forces launched a full-scale counterattack to chase them down. During the early September battles around Pusan, of the 70,000 North Korean troops involved, between 36,000 and 41,000 were either killed or captured from September 1st to 15th, though the total number of wounded remains uncounted. Despite these losses, around 30,000 North Korean soldiers managed to retreat north, due to the United Nations forces focusing more on capturing Seoul than blocking their escape. This allowed the survivors to regroup in the north, quickly being reformed into new divisions with equipment provided by the Soviet Union. The United Nations forces didn't stop there, pressing their offensive into North Korea starting September 30th. Military experts widely recognize the battle as a pivotal moment in modern warfare. Spencer C. Tucker, an American military historian, hailed the Inchon landings as a brilliant success, almost flawlessly executed. He noted it stood out as the only unambiguously successful large-scale United States combat operation for 4 decades. Many see the Inchon operation as General MacArthur's crowning achievement, showcasing his military brilliance and generalship. Yet Russell Stolfi presents a contrasting view, acknowledging the strategic brilliance of the Inchon landing, but critiquing the subsequent slow march towards Seoul as an operational misstep that diminished the impact of the initial success. Stolfi compares this cautious approach unfavorably with the German offensive in the Baltic in 1941, where German forces quickly seized control, advancing rapidly and effectively utilizing their leadership and strategy for a striking gain of almost 200 miles in just 4 days. In contrast, the American advance was cautious, with leadership staying back and a slow, methodical approach to moving forward, which stood in stark contrast to the fast and flexible German tactics. Despite such criticism, the Inchon operation, which resulted in the capture of Inchon in less than 24 hours with minimal American losses, was contingent on its success for further operations in southeastern South Korea, such as the Pusan Perimeter Offensive, indicating strategic caution and calculated risks by General Walton Walker and his forces. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.